everybody. My name is Cam Nigro with Blue Sky Training, and we're going to be talking about home performance. And specifically, we're going to be looking at manufactured housing. One of the reasons that we want to do this is because in creating our manufactured housing course, we've realized how broad and big this topic is, how much there is to talk about, and yet how little there is out there. And so we're going to help add to the study, we're going to help add to the topic, and talk about manufactured housing in general. Today with me I have two fine gentlemen. If you could just give a brief introduction of yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. I'm Chance Bertolami. I am the program manager for Eris Consulting. So part of my role is to oversee the mainly income qualified programs that we work with a lot of these manufactured housing units, managing those projects, communicating with contractors, that type of thing. So nice to meet everyone out there who's going to be watching this.
Hello, I'm Parker Lottie. I'm the owner of Blue Sky Training and just really been in this industry for a very long time. Well, compared to, age and things like that. But wanted to do this educational and hopefully fun podcast to enable people to learn more about these kind of unknowns that we find out in the field with the team with Eris, as well as other subcontractors and other things. So
Yeah, and part of the goal with home performance podcasts in general is that we want to be experience-based, and we want it to be applicable and real of what we've actually found in the field, not just head knowledge, but also that physical knowledge of how to do things and what that looks like and what we've actually experienced. So we'll be talking to a range of people and a range of topics that we've personally experienced. And today we are starting off manufactured housing. So we're going to look at the importance of why even talk about this? Why is manufactured housing so important to look towards upgrading and look towards improving various aspects of that? So real quick, why don't one or both of you go over the resume of kind of stuff we've done with Blue Sky and associated partner companies, and so what types of programs, how many manufactured homes we've worked on, and the kind of general scope of work that we've done on those manufactured homes.
Yeah, so I'll start from the Eris side. So Eris works with a few different income qualified programs across the state of Colorado. So within those populations, there tends to be a large subset of manufactured housing. And along with that, we are contracted to go in, do an initial energy assessment, and then we generate a scope of work for these mobile homes. And the scope of work from that is pretty wide. It can be anything from insulation and air sealing to HVAC upgrades to maybe full electrification, window replacements, plumbing leaks, health and safety issues. So there's a myriad of topics you can hit on these manufactured homes. But long story short, we have a lot of experience in the manufactured home space, not only from the energy assessing side, but also from the implementation of these retrofits. So I would say over the last few years that we've been doing these income qualified programs, we've done upwards of around 250 to 300 mobile homes at this point. And like I said, it's been the scale of projects. We've done really small scale stuff, maybe pre-weatherization work through some WAP agencies, all the way up to fuel switching and a full electrification project in a mobile home. So we've seen it top to bottom. We have a lot of experience with all types of situations in terms of retrofits for these mobile homes. And as we'll get into throughout the rest of this podcast series is we've realized we've had to take a different approach to how we implement these retrofits when it comes to standard site-built homes to manufactured homes. So it's been a great learning experience, and we've really enjoyed working in these income-qualified programs and dealing with the mobile homes in specific. But that's our main experience hands-on wise through Eris, and then Parker will kind of go through the training stuff that we do through Blue Sky that pertains to manufactured housing as well.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chance.
Yep.
So where we started was we were running into all sorts of pieces around these mobile homes that we hadn't seen before, and there was so much misinformation out there that we were having trouble actually getting people to agree on things. right? Whether it be the program heads or the people who actually help run the trailer parks, the handymen, the contractors, everyone had a different opinion on everything. And so we wanted to make sure that whoever is doing these projects actually knows the right information. And there is a lot of different information out there and that we had to comb through on the Blue Sky side in order to get rid of the inaccuracies and really just get everyone on the same page. And so that's what we're trying to do here after we created our mobile home course. That has a lot of wonderful information, and now we want to expand on that as well with these lessons learned, as well as just tips and tricks or the misinformation that we came across. We want to make sure that is no longer misinformation. And we do know that we have different rules or parameters based on the location of the mobile homes themselves. So a lot of this is based out of the experience within the Colorado and the mountain regions. So that's what this is kind of specifically going to be about. And of course, mobile homes in general they're built the same, they're built in a factory, all that kind of stuff. So there is a lot of similarities wherever you go, but we have tried a whole bunch of different pieces in this area to see which ones work and which ones don't.
Yeah, developing recommended practices.
Yes.
Data-driven, experience-driven, recommended practices. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's good. Yeah, and so with that and kind of that background on what we've worked on and what we've seen, what are some things that we've heard about manufactured homes, about the communities, just in general? What is the general consensus that we've heard about manufactured homes and work being done on them?
Yeah, there's a few things there. So I'll start with some of the kind of initial barriers that we ran into when we started doing these mobile home projects. And one of them is that these are typically really tight-knit communities. Everyone within the mobile home park tends to know each other, talk to each other, hang out with each other. So it's a tight-knit group, and that's good from the sense of having a good community and everything, but it's also a barrier for the contractor and the energy assessor, because a lot of the times it creates hesitancy around what type of contractor they want to allow into their home to do this scope of work. Like Parker touched on in the beginning, Joe the handyman in the community, maybe he even lives there in the mobile home park as well. He knows everyone there. He's kind of the guy they call up on a weekend or last minute when they need something done to their trailer, and he's there to do it. Which is great, but at the end of the day, he's probably not taking the building science approach to a lot of these retrofits. He's not considering the home as a system. So tying back to the initial barrier there, it's communicating with that local handyman, communicating with the rest of the community that, hey, we're not trying to take your preferred contractor away from you at all. That's not the impression we want to give, but instead, we want to bring him into our circle, maybe give him some additional training, some consultation on how to incorporate the building science principles that we use on a day-to-day basis when he steps foot in their home. So that's kind of one of the first things we need to consider before we start doing a bunch of work in these parks is how do we get the community on board with us to make sure that the implementation process of those retrofits goes as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, that's super, super valuable, right? Is getting everyone on the same page to begin with. Otherwise, we had at the very beginning of when we were doing this, right? We did not do that, and there was some misinformation in one of the parks that we were working in, and that spread like wildfire. Just like you said, everyone's very tight knit. They talk to each other, all that kind of stuff. So we finally did get ahead of that, right? And then it was some of this kind of crowd control, if you will, because everyone was up in arms. This is wrong, that's wrong, but really it wasn't. It was just a misunderstanding, and so then you had to go around, and we had to take a lot of time or Eris had to take a lot of time actually going around and
putting out those small fires.
Yeah, which lead to this massive inferno.
Yeah.
Right?
But at the end of the day, it was a good experience, because once we did put out those small fires and educated the homeowners a little bit about why the work looks the way it did, and why, we did things our way, and at the end of the day, they felt much better about the process.
On the building science way.
Exactly. Right? Once they were more informed about our process and why we're doing what we're doing, taking the whole home into account, they felt a lot better about it. So it was just that initial misunderstanding, and I think that barrier could have been non-existent had we just done a little bit more communication coordinating before we started implementing all these projects. So that's definitely a lesson learned that we've used moving forward. Had a lot more open channels of communication with maybe a community liaison that works within the park, the local handyman, and just the community members themselves. And then
that was a big thing too, the liaison, right?
Yeah.
When everyone is on the same page, that is a very trusted person within that community. Yep. And so that's something that we found once we got them on the same page with building science, then everything was a lot easier. We didn't know that going into it, that this person would be so beneficial to get to know.
Absolutely. Outside looking in, it would be easy to label that person as someone who's just trying to spread misinformation and make things a little bit more difficult, but that certainly wasn't the case. Once we got in touch with that person, sat down with them, had conversations with them, they were great. They cared deeply about these communities and making sure the homeowners there feel like they're heard and their voices and concerns are listened to. And so once we communicated a little bit of the building science stuff that we incorporate here, and how different climate zones and altitudes and temperatures come into effect here. Like, we don't treat mobile homes in Florida the same way we do in Colorado, which was part of the problem there as well. So just taking the time to, have an open mind with those employees there and give a little bit of your information to them, it stretches a long way. And I'm glad we did that. And like I said, it was a great lesson and experience learned there. And I think we can avoid having that problem moving forward just by keeping that open line of communication before we hit the ground running with all the retrofit work.
Yeah, and as far as the Blue Sky side goes, right, we always want to have everyone be educated, right? That's our thing. We want to educate people as much as we can in the right forms. And so something that was learned with Eris, right, is that education piece is so important. Yep. And that really goes further too, right? You educate that liaison, and you educate the community, and you educate that handyman or contractor, and then they go and they start talking about that stuff. And so now the person that you educated is now educating the rest of the people, which is really nice because that stops a lot of that miscommunication and just that misinformation in general. Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it seems like one of the important things about manufactured homes in these communities is like this idea of upstream prevention. There's a lot of problems. And look, Eris and, Blue Sky, and we're not afraid to admit we've made mistakes because we learn from mistakes, and other people can learn from our mistakes, and, and we can move forward with that.
Well, us being willing to make those mistakes and do these new type of retrofits that aren't typically seen in a lot of mobile homes is what's also enabled us, and mainly over at Blue Sky, to kind of set the standard around manufactured housing and create coursework and curriculum around that. And you can't really be innovative or implement best practices if you're not willing to take that leap and maybe do something that the standard contractor would shy away from because they're not as familiar as they'd like to be with those systems.
Yeah, that's big too. I mean, to have recommended practices, you need practice. So yeah, that's big. And contractors are another one, along with programs and cities and utilities. Has there been any noticed disconnect between maybe home performance goals and program goals, or maybe has there been any miscommunication on the city utility program end beyond just that internal to the manufactured home end? And what kind of areas has there been some level of misinformation?
I think just to jump back 10 seconds.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to mention that the data-driven piece is a huge piece of that, right? Like, you can make that jump, but if you don't understand what's going on when you do, then it's just a jump, right? Where Eris has done it, where it's very data-driven, and that's how everyone figured out this works and this doesn't, right?
Yeah.
So we've been able to learn a lot on both the Eris and Blue Sky side within this because of the data that we've been gathering, leakage numbers and pictures and the homeowner, feedback, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hypothesis until tested thoroughly. So it is building science. So it makes sense.
Getting to the question that you just asked, Cameron, there's a unique relationship with the state programs / utilities in terms of how we interact with them and what their goals are, what our goals are. There's a lot of agreements, and then there are certain areas where we clash at times. And where I would say, where we're in agreement is obviously these program heads and these utilities, they want good customer or participant satisfaction. They want high impact work to be done, whether that's health and safety or weatherization work that's going to make an impact on their overall comfort, their utility bill. We're in agreement there that at the end of the day, the goal is to serve the participant in the best way possible, because a lot of the times this is the only opportunity they're going to get to be able to take advantage of a lot of this work, because obviously being in that underserved low income community, they don't have the funds themselves to implement a lot of this stuff. So that's where we're definitely in common agreement. Some areas where we potentially have some room to clash heads in terms of ideology is what we've noticed is a lot of the times program heads, utilities, they're a little bit hesitant to move forward with certain projects that could potentially raise your electric bill slightly. So where we tend to clash there sometimes is a lot of the times we'd like to go in and fuel switch a lot of these homes, whether you're a manufactured home or a site-built home. And now we're taking that gas or that delivered fuel away. We're fully electrifying. So in some cases, that could result in a little bit of a higher of electric bill, but we also have to keep in mind that we've taken away that gas bill. We've taken away that propane or delivered fuel bill.
And the overall, associated health and safety factors.
And that's a big one, is the health and safety.
Carbon footprint goes down, greenhouse gas emissions go down. So that's some areas where we tend to clash, is a lot of the times there will be hesitancy from the utility or the program head, like, hey, I know Eris wants to go in and electrify a lot of these homes, but at the end of the day, we need to be really cognizant about potentially raising their electric bills. And look, we understand that we do not want to raise their utility bills where it's not necessary. But at the end of the day, when you want to look towards lower carbon footprint, lower greenhouse gas emissions, just more efficiency in general, better health and safety too, fully electrifying and getting them on that path is the way to do it. So if there was one area I could speak to where there is a little bit of disagreement there, it's in that area. But I will say we do a lot of work to try and be data driven and show the program heads and utility heads that, hey, we understand your hesitancy here, but let me show you why it makes sense to get them on that path towards electrification.
Yeah. Again, that grounding and importance.
Something along those lines as well is if electrification isn't correct, right? We're not, that hasn't been pushed.
Of course. It has to make sense.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. And with the health and safety piece, especially, this weekend, it's supposed to be 103.
Yeah.
Right? That's really hot. And a lot of these buildings don't have cooling.
Yep.
And so, yes, some of their bills in the winter may get raised, may not. But now all of a sudden they have cooling, which, especially for an older population, right? There's some retirement communities and stuff like that here. And those can be like heat stroke and things like that are real concerns. So I think that's where we get back into agreeance with the utilities and the program heads and things like that, right? Is they see the value of that health and safety aspect to electrify or to at least get them cooling as well, right? Even though it could raise their bill, it could also save a life.
Yeah,
and it's not as cut and dry as it raises your bill or it doesn't. There is a price that a lot of people would put on comfort and safety, right? Like if a homeowner has to pay an extra $10, $15 a month in electric so that they have cooling, like Parker said, a lot of these homeowners are very elderly. 100 plus degree weather becomes a serious health risk, especially in manufactured homes. They're not going to be insulated well a lot of the times. They're going to be very leaky a lot of the time. So it's going to exacerbate the issue of the extreme heat outside. So what price do you put on that comfort and that peace of mind that when we do get into peak summer, I won't have to worry about heat stroke or having to relocate for the night because it's 110 degrees outside and I don't feel safe in my home. There's a price to be put on that as well. So it's our job
to get up to go to work, right?
Exactly.
Like you need a good night's sleep. That helps you be productive in your day the next day, and there is value there as well.
Totally.
And just a bit more on that health and safety piece. We'll look at health and safety real quick, and then we'll look at energy efficiency and just most common areas of concern, most common things that we've seen, and why, again, it's important to look at manufactured homes, why it's important to have this topic. But on that health and safety, one of the things when I was researching that surprised me was the average age, or maybe it didn't surprise me, I almost expected it, but the average age of a manufactured home is 1988 in the country, which wouldn't be as much of a problem if the main codes for safety came out in 1994, where the main codes for safety, both fire safety and contaminant safety. So most of these are pre-codified homes. And so how do we take these pre-codified homes and make them safer? And what are the common issues with pre-codified homes, especially when the EPA has actually recognized a specific thing called mobile home syndrome, which is the same as sick building syndrome. Basically, a building can actually make you sick consistently. So what are some of those specific health and safety things that we've noticed that these houses are at risk of on a very common basis, and why is that important to look at them?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, there's a myriad of those issues when it comes to manufactured housing, especially the older they get. So one of the common issues that we see when we go into these mobile homes is they're pretty much all of them have what we'd call a vented crawl space at the end of the day. So it's not conditioned. So from an insulation standpoint, extremely poor. Most of the time, there's nothing down there. Again, we can talk about why that is because it's very difficult to insulate down there properly. But
there's generally dirt underneath those, right? Which releases bad things that we don't want to breathe in.
All kinds of soil
gas.
pollutants, but also a big piece of that is the moisture that's now allowed to come up through there. We've seen countless times where we're not sealed down there with a proper vapor barrier, and now we have moisture rising up through the belly, degrading the belly. Now you have potential mold on the floor joist, the subfloor, and that can create, like you're saying, mobile home syndrome because the indoor air quality is so poor.
And they're relatively tight buildings, like in general, because they're built inside, right? So, and they're small. So if there is bad indoor air, there's bad air getting in there, it increases very quickly because they're a smaller space.
And those furnaces circulate quickly through that space.
Absolutely.
And the ducting is generally underneath, and if it's not sealed, it's pulling all of that in, blowing it around the house. And how often do you see the belly cut?
Probably 99% of the time.
So that's, and whether that was pests or by a contractor that wasn't well educated, they
Exactly.
didn't know.
It's a coupling of both, right? And when we talk about pests, they'll dig their way into that belly. Now they're leaving feces behind.
Yeah.
That maybe they get stuck in there and they die, and now they're rotting, and then that's getting sucked up into the home. There's all kinds of problems that start within that crawl space, and it's taken a lot of practice and a lot of lessons learned on the Eris side to determine what actually works for these crawl spaces and what's a waste of time and money. And I think we've done a pretty good job over the years of zeroing in on what's the best approach for these crawl spaces. And we've kind of developed decision trees on what manufactured homes can we actually put a vapor barrier down and insulate on, which homes can't we do that on, and what can we do in replace of that. So when we're talking about health and safety issues, the crawl space is definitely almost always going to be a good place to start in terms of areas you want to tackle. And then another common thing I see is a lot of these manufactured homes, they're gas fueled. So a lot of the times they'll have gas ovens, gas range, no venting.
Yeah.
Either no venting at all, or it's just a recirculating fan that's just recirculating that back into the home. So like Parker said, these are the smaller, tighter units. So when they're cooking, maybe you're cooking something all day long, a soup or something that requires you to be on the stove all day long. Exactly.
Thanksgiving, all your family is here.
You're now subject to that all day long. So that's an easy one. That's cost effective, very impactful, can be done in a day. Very hard to mess up if you have the proper contractor, and that can make a big impact. Because another thing to consider too is, with the income qualified population, these people are cooking at home. They're not going out to eat, at least not very frequently. So the vast majority of their meals are being cooked at home on that gas range, in that gas oven. So that appliance gets a lot of use, more so than the standard middle class or upper class home where they have the luxury of going out to a restaurant or ordering takeout on a regular basis. So these people are using that appliance much more frequently. So now that retrofit, if you want to call that a retrofit, becomes much more top priority than it would in a lot of other homes.
Well, and how often, I remember a couple that I went out to, right, where the people cooked every day, 3 meals a day, and some of them had the recirc. Every once in a while you saw one that actually did vent outside. But that fan, because they're cooking so much, it just gets really, really gross and can become a fire hazard. Different other health and safety measures because of that. And so I think that's something
you can't get in that attic to see what's up there.
Correct.
So there's no attic usually. But
so it's really good to make sure that as an education piece, right, that needs to be cleaned off and everything. That's not necessarily on a contractor, but it's just education to the homeowner themselves. Yeah.
And if the contractors are properly advocating for home performance, it is on a contractor in a sense,
it should be, correct.
So that's good. I think now let's real quick look at energy efficiency. So one thing in study, 35% manufactured homes use an average of 35% less energy than a typical site-built home, which is great. But they spend nearly double the cost per square foot a typical site built. And this is older research because unfortunately there's not a lot of current research. But in 2008, the matter of the fact was a typical site built home spent 74 cents per square foot on their cost to run. Manufactured homes spent $1.38 per square foot to run. So they may be less, using less energy just because of most likely their size, but they're spending way more. So why is energy efficiency important? If you could point to one thing, why is energy efficiency so important for these homes?
I mean, I think you just said it.
I was literally just going to say that.
Cost. Well, why would it matter maybe more?
Right. So with a potential lower income bracket, right, the money that's spent on that becomes a bigger percentage of their monthly income.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a big piece of why it's really important to try to make these more efficient so that they're using less energy. Right. And we can go back to the belly being cut.
Yeah.
Right. We found that the duct work under there, especially with a cut belly, becomes a really big deal if it's not sealed.
Yep.
And the water lines are in there. The insulation for that building a lot of times is in there unless something else has been done around the sides of the skirting. And so if you don't take care of that piece itself, then all of a sudden you have these huge bills per square foot. Which is very detrimental to someone who may not be making that much money already. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
it's a big deal.
When we talk about why efficiency is important, it's also, you can lump it into health and safety too, because what we've noticed is these manufactured homes, comparative to site-built homes, they're never going to have the most efficient option in there. When it comes to water heating, they're either going to have that natural draft water heater if it's a gas-powered manufactured home, or they're going to have that giant tank storage electric water heater if it's an all-electric home.
Sometimes on the outside of the actual space itself.
You put the words right in my mouth. So, and then for space heating, most of the time it's just in a standard 80%er induced draft furnace, as opposed to a lot of these site-built homes you'll see with sealed combustion units, much safer, much more efficient. So part of it is, yes, we want to upgrade these units for more energy efficiency that will bring down utility costs, but a lot of the times more efficient appliances also translates to safer appliances as well. So a safer option for that 80%er is a sealed combustion unit, and those can't backdraft. They have a lot less of a health and safety impact on the homeowner. Same thing with a natural draft water heater. If I can get a heat pump water heater in there, or if we have to stick with gas, a tankless sealed combustion water heater, now we're more efficient, but we're also far safer as well.
And I'll put a caveat on that, as long as the work was done correctly.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right.
So always, the contractors putting these in need to know it is different than a typical site-built home.
Yeah. The furnaces are different.
Yeah.
The water heaters are generally different. There's different rules around them, and different sizes needed because of the space that's allowed for these units.
A lot of difference to...
It's a different world.
Yeah,
it really is.
For sure. Definitely is. And with that world, we'll wrap on this last question. Is the topic getting more focused, would you say, being in these programs? And what do you think the future direction of specifically manufactured housing in home performance is? What are some new things coming out with that?
Yeah, there's definitely more focus on the manufactured housing community in terms of energy programs statewide. One thing they're finally realizing is that these communities really are underserved. They're not getting the help they need. So with a lot of the work Eris has been going after lately, the proposals that pop up here and there, a lot of them are income qualified centered. And I think that's a mixture of, like I just said, there's more awareness around that, but also, it helps the cities and municipalities and utilities look good when they're seen actively trying to make a difference in these communities, making sure no one's left behind, that type of mentality. So from a work perspective, there is a lot more focus on getting in these communities and better serving them and making sure they get the help that they need, which is great. That's what we want at the end of the day. But with that increased awareness, it's on organizations like ours to stay up with best practices and even, in Blue Sky's case, create those best practices.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, and with, I think one of the common concerns with contractors is there's just not that much. There's just not that many manufactured homes. It's not worth my time to invest in education for doing these, because how many are there really? But with it being, on average, 10% of any given state's housing stock. That's a 10% business you can increase, just by...
Exactly. And tying into what I just said, a lot of these programs that are incentivizing low-income work, they want to hit 400, 500, 600 manufactured homes in a year. Like, what contractor wouldn't want to get on board with that? If you're an HVAC contractor, why wouldn't you want to learn how to do HVAC in a manufactured home?
Especially because they multiply usually.
Exactly. Why do you want to cut yourself out of that market? From a business perspective, I don't think that's intelligent. So I think with more awareness here, more jobs are created within that space, and that's going to become more attractive to the contractor.
Yeah.
And from the program perspective and just the overall human perspective, right? If we're helping out these communities, and then that allows these people to have a better life, if you will, or maybe a more stable life, because they're not spending so much on all the utilities, and they're more comfortable in their homes. That is, I think that's a great, you mentioned kind of like a feel-good piece, right? It's a great feel-good piece, as well as it does actually affect the lives of the people that are being helped.
Yeah, and broader
really cool.
energy use by the country as a whole. Cuts down on that.
Absolutely. And for the utilities, it can help so they don't have to spend a bunch of money to increase their capacity. Yeah. Right? If these are becoming less of a, I don't want to say burden, but I don't know another term, a burden on the grid.
An energy hole, you know?
Yeah, a lot of these utilities have dedicated climate action plans, and they care a lot about meeting those goals. And a lot of those goals pertain to lower greenhouse gas emissions, less strain on the grid in general. And what better way to meet those goals than to hit the population that you touched on is using the vast majority of the energy. Or not using the vast majority
per square foot.
Per square foot, paying much more than a site-built home would. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, instead of just adding infrastructure, let's upgrade our existing infrastructure to reach these goals. So, awesome. Yeah, that's this idea of importance with manufactured homes. In future weeks, we'll look at how to set up those communication plans that we've talked about, some more details on that, and then we'll go into more details on, contractors, programs, when to replace units, looking at the furnaces, the water heaters. So there's just so much to talk about that we'll discuss in future weeks. And of course, always our training reflects these recommended practices and this data-driven mentality. So it will be reflective of what we talk about here. And you can check that out on Blue Sky's website for blueskytraining.com. All right, that's it. We'll sign off, I guess.
Thank you.